welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the creator of an absolutely fascinating and deeply affecting documentary about a very important person that I think we could all do to know a little bit more about in the history of England and the world and technology, all sorts of really fascinating areas that would be completely different without this person. So without further ado, welcome. Could you please introduce yourself and your film, please?
Hi, Jen. Thank you very much for inviting me on your program. My name is Nick Horrell, and I am the producer and director of a new documentary called Frank Whittle, A Genius in the Family. A little bit about my background. I trained as a journalist. I was trained by the BBC to be a television and radio reporter, and I created lots of stories, political protests, floods, fires, court cases, all those sorts of things. And when I moved on and created my own production company, I started to make corporate films and training films, but very much in a documentary style. So I've always been interested in visual storytelling with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And alongside the business work, the corporate work, the training work, I had also been making a few documentaries and some short films as well, short fiction films, very squarely aimed at the film festival circuit, the film festival audiences, just to see what responses I was getting, just to test out whether or not I could create stories that engaged with genuine audiences that I was often part of. About 10 years ago, I was approached by a producer-director called Nicholas Jones to edit a feature documentary about the acclaimed test pilot Captain Eric Brown. Now, Captain Eric Brown was an absolutely astonishing World War II pilot, and with the Fleet Air Arm, which is the flying side of the Royal Navy. And also, he became a test pilot as well, testing hundreds of aircraft, both during and after World War II. Nicholas wanted to make this documentary about Captain Eric Brown, and he asked me to edit it. And that's how we kind of got our act together in terms of co-directors and producers. And he explained to me and showed me that he'd also done a film about more or less 20 years ago now on the jet pioneer Frank Whittle. I took an interest in this. And in the early 2020s, I approached Nicholas with the idea of doing a modern retelling of the Whittle story, really not only reflecting the achievements of Frank Whittle, the jet pioneer, inventor of the turbojet, but also the bond that exists, the really strong bond that exists between Frank and his younger son, Ian, that's really at the heart of this new documentary. And so it began, the new documentary, Frank Whittle, A Genius in the Family.
All right. So could you talk a little bit more about what this film is about?
So the new film tells the remarkable story, in our view, of Frank Whittle's incredible struggles to build a jet engine. And the film is about to be released. Whittle was at the forefront of the race to build a war-winning jet fighter to take on the might of the German Luftwaffe. His work went on to revolutionize the way we fly today. A Genius in the Family, the title of Frank Whittle, A Genius in the Family, reflects that we've been allowed exclusive access to Frank Whittle's youngest son, Ian, who tells the story of a father who was regarded by many as a mathematical genius, but he was a workaholic. He was obsessed with his jet engine project and whose health began to buckle under the pressure. It's a modern retelling of a story about a British RAF hero. It reveals Whittle's amazing aeronautical achievements, proving the jet engine concept mathematically when he was just 22 years old, building Britain's first jet engine and influencing the world of aviation, particularly in the United States and Europe. But through first-hand testimony, it also uncovers the huge impact on Whittle's life of his achievements, his health, particularly his His mental health took a huge blow because of the pressures he faced. And it's an area that wasn't much either talked about or even fully understood in the 1940s. What it also does is try to glance into the future. Whittle's vision and his willingness to take risks is what will be needed if the aviation industry is to meet its biggest ever challenge of reaching net zero by 2050. And that's not us as documentary makers saying that. That's according to Professor Robert Miller, who's the director of the Whittle Laboratory at Cambridge University that conducts pioneering research into the latest jet technology. So it's a wild ride, extreme highs and extreme lows, but at the heart of it is this really lovely, strong, fascinating family bond between a father, Frank Whittle, and his son, Ian Whittle.
Could you talk a little bit about what went into making this film, specifically your sources? And that can mean archival, documentary, people you consulted, places you went. What went into the mix?
What's gone into the story is a lot of different aspects to bring to life the world of the 1940s and beyond, where Frank Whittle was really at the height of his powers. So at the foundation of the story is personal testimony of one of the people who knew him the best, his younger son, Ian Whittle. That's one of the keys, this strong, amazing, fascinating family bond between father and son. We go flying with Ian in his own plane. We travel with Ian. He flies to a museum called the Jet Age Museum in Gloucestershire, England. And there is a replica of Whittle's jet. It's called the Gloucester E-2839. It was the first British jet aircraft. And there's also a Whittle engine there on loan from the Royal Air Force Museum as well. We have rare archive, including Whittle's jet itself in the air in the 1940s, the Gloucester E-2839. We have archive of Frank Whittle being interviewed from 40 years ago, his last major interview. And we also have archive of Dr. Hans von Hein, who was the German jet pioneer. There was a parallel jet program development going on in Germany at a similar time. And also Captain Eric Brown as well, acclaimed World War II pilot and amazing test pilot. We have archive of Captain Eric Brown as well. We go to some museums as well. I mentioned the Jet Age Museum. We also go to the London Science Museum as well, and we see one of the original Whittle engines. It was known as the WU, or the Whittle unit, which was used as a foundation for all of the other engines that came after that. We go to Cambridge University, where Frank Whittle refined his ideas on the jet engine, and we visit the Whittle Laboratory, which is at the forefront of jet engine technology today. Also, we wanted to bring in contemporary contributors as well. We wanted to bring this right into the present day. We wanted a modern retelling of the so-called traditional Whittle story. So we have Professor Robert Miller, the director of Cambridge University's acclaimed Whittle Laboratory, who believes Whittle is rightly considered an engineering genius. We have Dr. Victoria Taylor, a brilliant military historian who thinks it's possible, just possible, that the Battle of Britain may not have happened had Britain got jet fighters in the skies by 1940s or in the early 1940s. Max Sasali. Max is Frank Whittle's great-grandson, who has followed in his great-grandfather's footsteps to carve out his own career as an aeronautical engineer, going to Cambridge University, and he's now working as an aeronautical engineer in industry. We have Richard Noble, a former land speed world record holder who drove his jet car at more than 600 miles an hour across an American desert in the early 1980s, who was inspired by the work of Whittle and his determination and his innovative prowess and willingness to take risks. And also we have the former president of the Royal Aeronautical Society, Carissa Khan, and she reveals and discusses the legacy of Whittle and the impact on civil aviation in particular, an industry that continues to employ more than 90 million people worldwide. So what we believe as directors and myself as a producer It's a fascinating story of a mathematical genius who became one of the world's greatest aviation pioneers.
Why was this project so important to you, and what were your goals in telling Frank Whittle's story?
So, as a producer director, I've always been interested in human stories and questions that enable us to find out more about ourselves, why we are the way we are, and what drives us, what are our motivations, where does our resilience come from, how did we get the energy under such difficult circumstances. And so to be allowed to explore this strong, fascinating family bond between Ian, son of Frank Whittle, and his jet pioneer father, Sir Frank Whittle, seemed to me like a gilt-edged opportunity, an amazing privilege. In terms of timing, it's 85 years ago this year since Whittle's jet, the Gloucester E2839, first took to the skies in Britain, which I think marks a good point at which to revisit the Whittle story as well, his achievements and his struggles. I think also, if you look at it from a personal and a global point of view as well, I think there's a number of things we can say here. I think at a personal level, the Whittle spirit, that stubborn determination to do good work, could be something perhaps people from all walks of life could use for inspiration in their own worlds, no matter what they're doing. It could be sport, it could be business, it could be the arts, it could be medicine, whatever projects they're working on. There may come a time when they're running out of money, they're running out of time, nobody's answering the calls, and people have lost interest, and you feel a sort of an overwhelming accumulation of rejection. And yet, that's exactly what Frank Whittle went through. And he didn't give up. He didn't give up under all of these awful circumstances that he faced. And you have to bear in mind that in the early 1940s, his country, Great Britain, faced the prospect of annihilation. Here we have a country that faced one of the world's strongest and biggest war machines the world has ever seen. And they wanted to take over Great Britain. And so he was building a jet engine to go into a jet fighter to take on the might of the German Luftwaffe. And so it was a race against time. He couldn't give up. He didn't have a choice. And he kept going through all of the difficulties and the struggles that he faced. I think also there's one as a global point, perhaps, as well, from an environmental point of view, in terms of the Whittle spirit and why it's needed to create the jet engines for the mid and late 21st century. And that's according, certainly, to Professor Robert Miller, who's the director of the Whittle Laboratory. The Whittle Laboratory is tasked with creating the next generation of jet engines that are more efficient and, in particular, less polluting than previous engines, if the industry is to meet its target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So I think the Whittle story. So I think the Whittle story is inspiring on both a personal level and also a global level as well.
What challenges did you face while making this film?
That's a fascinating question, Jen. I think I'd like to break that question down into two areas. One is the Whittle story itself, so the creative side, and also then there's the production aspect as well. And there are lots of areas to production where challenges can emerge. So in terms of the story, fundamentally, I think the biggest challenge was doing justice to the Whittle story, is reflecting the fact that here was a man who at the age of just 22 developed and created a mathematical concept of the jet engine and proved that it could work mathematically. A jet engine using only hot air propelled out of the back of the engine could lift an aircraft very fast, very far, and very high into the sky. And he struggled very hard to get people to believe in that idea, to find the funding, and also to create the team and also the engineering that actually would make it work. But he did. And that's a big deal. It's quite difficult to capture that effort and that energy and that drive. But hopefully we have tried to do that in this new documentary. And it is with huge thanks, I think, fundamentally to the efforts of Ian Whittle, his son, to convey the time and the place that really works, in our view, very well in terms of actually supporting the storyline, the Whittle storyline there. In terms of the actual production itself, there were quite a few challenges. Some of them were quite, I suppose, straightforward logistical ones. For example, I found myself filming in Ian's plane, which is a light aircraft. It's a lovely, fantastic little light aircraft. But the key word there is little. There's not much room in that cockpit. And I was there with a few cameras and microphones and wide angle lenses and all sorts of things. It's a small space. So it was quite a challenge to film within the cockpit there, but it was brilliant. It was absolute honour to go up with this amazing pilot that is Ian Whittle. Ian himself became an RAF pilot and then became an airline pilot flying jumbo jets, and so it was an absolute honour to fly with such an experienced pilot. And off we went to the Jet Age Museum to go and see a replica of Frank Whittle's first jet aircraft. I think also the timing was certainly a challenge. Almost as soon as we'd created the idea and formed a timeline, a global pandemic hit us. So that's that really put a stop to quite a bit of filming, and so we had to bide our time and do lots of and use it to plan. But as producers, as directors, you want to get out there, you want to film and get the footage. So that was a little bit frustrating. Time and money was always an issue. I think also pacing as well from a pure technical creative side of things. I was not only the producer director, but I was the editor on this film as well. And I think pacing is always a challenge in my view, because it's quite difficult to see the pace of a film until you actually watch it back. But you can't, if you're at the 40-minute time point on a 70-minute timeline, it's quite difficult to watch 40 minutes worth of footage all the time. So you have to be confident in your decision making and where you actually extend footage and when you shorten footage. And those decisions are quite challenging to make. So I learned a lot about pacing and how the story flows and where you need to dwell and go into detail and where you can actually be more where you can raise the pace as well. That was also a challenging point as well. And I think finally, certainly as a producer, I found that the landscape of film and documentary distribution has changed radically, even in 5 years. At the time when this film was first conceived, a lot of our thoughts were to pitch the film to traditional broadcasters who would perhaps support in some financial way the making of the film, and then they would host it on their channel. That has changed a lot with the radical rise, the accelerated rise of the streaming services, online streaming services, where a lot of services now host it online, and people can view on their mobile phones, they can view on their devices, as well as the computers and traditional television screens. And so that landscape of distribution has been quite a challenge to keep pace with. In some ways, it's fantastic because there are more opportunities, but as a result of that, there are also lots more filmmakers out there as well. Quite rightly, it's a wonderfully there's been a huge democratization of filmmaking with the rise of affordable filmmaking, high quality filmmaking equipment, which is wonderful. People can tell their stories, but obviously there's a lot of stories to be told, and there's only so many streamers, and there's only so much time people have to watch them as well. It's quite a competitive landscape as well, so it's getting that balance right that's been quite a challenge as well.
Your previous answer just suggested that you wore many hats over the course of this production: director, writer, even composer and narrator, amongst others. What areas do you feel like you learned the most about? And what was it like being involved in so many levels of production?
Brilliant question, Jen. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think fundamentally, it can sound almost like control freakery that I had taken on quite a lot of the roles, production roles within this new film, Frank Whittle, A Genius in the Family. But I think there is an honest answer and a very straightforward one, and it comes down to money. It's as simple as that. It would have been wonderful to have been able to afford lots more camera operators and audio teams and film editors and special effects people and all those sorts of things. But unfortunately, simply the budget just wasn't there. So I had to take on quite a few roles myself. That isn't to say we weren't able to bring in support occasionally. Occasionally, I did work with camera crews who were absolutely wonderful and very, very talented. We had a brilliant animator join us as well for a short while to help with the animation as to how jet engines actually work, the turbojet and the turbofan engines themselves, and we have these lovely animations to show how they actually work in very simplified form. But also, to a certain extent, you just have to get on with it, a little bit like Frank Whittle himself. There comes a point at which you look, is this film going to get made or not? And I come from a background from the late 70s, early 80s. That there was a movement called punk. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but one of its mottos was "get on with it," and so that's what I grew up hearing and living with, and so that's exactly what I've done. You're absolutely right about the roles that I took on: producer, co-director with my colleague Nicholas Jones, who was also a co-director, writer, co-writer with Nicholas as well, looking after some of the music myself. Looking after quite a bit of the editing and looking after the narration as well. I think the one area that I've really found that I've grown a lot in and become fascinated by is being a producer. So actually seeing the big picture and being able to see how this concept that ultimately was on a white piece of paper on a page of A4 5 years ago has transformed into this almost 70-minute global documentary, which we're very proud of. And I've certainly had to think about lots of different aspects: the pre-production, the planning, which contributors are we going to use, and what part of the story are they going to be useful for and enhance and bring added interest to. Thinking about the archive as well. Where are we going to find the archive, and how is the archive going to dovetail into the more contemporary footage that we've got of Ian Whittle himself, Frank's son, the locations that we go to around the country, all those sorts of things. And thinking about the music, I can write music myself. I can produce music myself. I can read music. So that wasn't too difficult for me, and it was nice to do. But I've also been able to license a couple of tracks as well from other composer producers. Narration, once again, working with that and juggling crews, juggling animators, and also then working with distribution teams as well, which I found absolutely fascinating. Working with the likes of Dan Gerlitz at Soundview Media Partners, fantastic, incredibly supportive. I learned a lot from Dan every time I speak to him. Every day is a school day with Dan. It's always good. And obviously in the very competitive but fascinating world of distribution as well, I've had to come up to speed very quickly on distribution and thinking very carefully as to what are we trying to say? What is this story fundamentally about? And thinking also and trying to connect with your audience as well. And all of those roles in some way come under the umbrella of being a producer. You need to know a little about a lot. You don't have to be absolute fantastic expert, but you need to know a little about a lot. And I like doing that. I do find that fascinating, very, very interesting, and quite invigorating. And what an honor to do it on such an important documentary.
That's actually a very nice parallel to, I think, how I think of a librarian's career. Sort of, I like to think of it as sort of a professional dilettante,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. You need to be able to answer people professionally. So that the expert, when they have a conversation with you, thinks, yes, you're hiring me to be an expert, but you know what you're talking about. You've been there and you've worked with us before. You speak my language. And it's being able to speak different languages in English, which is strange. But yeah, that was more or less what I had to do, which was really good.
So when will this film be released and where will people be able to see it?
Okay, thank you, Jen. The feature documentary, Frank Whittle, A Genius in the Family, will be released on May the 12th, 2026. The documentary is just under 70 minutes long and it is available now for pre-order on Amazon on DVD. So the DVD is available for pre-order now on Amazon. The digital version of the film will also be available on online streaming platforms again from May the 12th.
And we will have a copy of the DVD here at our library as well when that becomes available. Well, I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and our listeners today. I always like to end with a question about what's on your horizon? What are you looking at in the future?
Thank you, Jen. Yes, looking ahead, I think what I'd like to do, because I've become quite knowledgeable on the Frank Whittle story, particularly the Whittle spirit, this stubborn determination to do good work. I'd like to see how the legacy of the Whittle spirit is being used perhaps in today's and tomorrow's aviation as well. I think therein lies a fascinating story about how jet engines are going to develop in the mid to late 21st century, particularly how they're going to become more efficient and also more environmentally friendly as the aviation industry faces its biggest challenge, as Professor Rob Miller says from the Whittle Laboratory at Cambridge University, of meeting the challenge of net zero by 2050. How is that going to be achieved? What are the challenges now? What teams need to be created and generated? What kind of engineering is going to be required? And what kind of funding and collaboration will be needed to make the jet engines of the future a reality?
Well, I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to learn more about Frank Whittle, and I'm so excited that I might get to learn more about him in the future. So thank you again for your time and for sharing his story and your work. It's been absolutely delightful.
It's been brilliant to speak with you, Jen. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome. All right, and listeners, thank you for joining us. Please check out Frank Whittle, A Genius in the Family. It's extremely interesting and deeply moving, and I do think you will learn a lot and feel a lot, and you will appreciate the experience. All right, thank you for joining us again. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.